world to spotlight solutions and encourage action and progress. I'm Edward Felsenthal, Editor-in-Chief and CEO of Time. We have another great show for you today. Our focus today is on lessons in crisis. What are we learning during this extraordinary period in the world? What will we take with us as we rebuild the world in the aftermath of this crisis? We encourage you to participate in the conversation with us using the hashtag TIME100 Talks. Joining us for these conversations today is a terrific list of guests and thinkers and leaders. We have U.S. Senator Tim Scott, Republican of South Carolina. He'll be speaking with Time's national political correspondent, Molly Ball. Erna Solberg, Prime Minister of Norway, which has been one of the more successful countries in the world in keeping COVID-19 under control, will speak with Time's international editor, Dan Stewart. I'll be chatting with world-famous cellist Yo-Yo Ma, who will be performing twice in today's program. He and I will speak about the power of music for both comfort and change. And finally, we have the president of the National Education Association, Lily Eskelsen García, and author and educator, Chasten Buttigieg. They'll join Time correspondent Justin Worland for a conversation on reopening our schools. Before we kick off today's program, we'd like to take a moment to recognize and honor the work and the legacies of two extraordinary leaders, two extraordinary people, Congressman John Lewis and Reverend C.T. Vivian, who died in the past week. Congressman Lewis is on the cover of our magazine, Time magazine, the new issue released today. Both men worked directly with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at the height of the struggle for racial justice in the 1960s and continued throughout their careers to push our nation closer toward its ideals. As Congressman Lewis wrote in a piece for Time 2 years ago, Dr. King and others inspired me to get in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. And I think we're going to have generations for years to come that will be prepared to get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble, and lead us to higher heights. It's a struggle that doesn't last one day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year. It's the struggle of a lifetime. Yo-Yo Ma, who's with us today and who received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Obama on the same day as John Lewis, is going to dedicate the first of 2 performances today to the work and memory of John Lewis and C.T. Vivian. He'll be performing Appalachia Waltz.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yo-Yo Ma, for that beautiful performance, beautiful dedication. I look forward to speaking with you later in the program. Earlier this year, Time Studios, in collaboration with CNN Films and AGC Studios, produced a documentary on the life and work of John Lewis. We'd like to show you a clip of that documentary. It's called John Lewis, Good Trouble.
I would see those signs that said white men, colored men, white women, colored women, white waiting, colored waiting. And I would ask my mother, my father, my grandparents, and my great-grandparents why. They would say, boy, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way. Don't get in trouble. But in 1955, 15 years old, the action of Rosa Parks, the words and leadership of Dr. King inspired me to get in trouble, what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. It's time for all good people in this state, here in Dallas, to get in trouble. You know, I got arrested a few times during the 60s. 40 times. And since I've been in Congress, another 5 times. And I'm probably going to get arrested again for something. But my philosophy is very simple. When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, say something, do something, get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble.
You're watching Time 100 Talks. I'm Molly Ball, Time's national political correspondent. I am delighted to be joined today by Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, ma'am. Good to be with you, Molly.
Let's start with the news of the passing of John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, who many people called the conscience of the Congress. Do you have any reflections on the life he led?
Well, a man that I loved and got to know when I was elected to Congress. I watched him as a kid growing up and just marveled at his steadfastness, his powerful will, his tenacity, but also his kindness. When I was elected to Congress in 2011, one of the first individuals to invite me into their office was John Lewis. In his office, he has all the pictures from the 60s. A Bloody Sunday, the sacrifices and the pain that he went through so that someone who looked like me could one day become a senator. And we sat there for over an hour and had a conversation. And one of the things that he told me before I left his office was, he said, you know, you're going to be in a unique position. You're an African-American who happens to be a Republican, and that's going to cause some consternation. He said, please remember to never let life make you bitter. And I was kind of struck by that because I was, wet behind the ears, looking at like a deer in the in headlights. And he was very clear, very concise, and very open with the fact that in life, things will happen to you. It's how you respond to those things that will define you. So never let your response include bitterness.
Speaking of the fight for racial justice, you spearheaded the police reform bill that was blocked in the Senate last month. Do you still have any hope for something getting done on this issue?
I do. I'll say that folks like Karen Bass, who is the chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus, she and I met for over an hour. We've been in conversation since then. I've spoken to some of the family members who lost their loved ones, their brothers, to police brutality and violence. I think there's reasons to be hopeful. One of the family members told me, never ever say it's dead, because their brothers are dead, but police reform can never be dead. It may be delayed, but it will never be denied. And so I love that spirit. Karen has been able to harness that energy. She's taken a look at the legislation. Others have been focusing on it for the last 2 weeks. And surprisingly, the House Democrats are like pushing it towards the table again. I'm so excited that they're accompanied by House Republicans and myself and others. Our hope is, of course, that those in the Senate who want to delay until after the election in hopes of getting the bill they want would realize that 2/3 of what you want is a great place to start. And let's not deny the communities that are suffering today legislative victories that give them reasons to be hopeful in the process, frankly, hopeful in the institutions of authority that as a young guy, I personally lost hope in, to be honest with you. So I'm hoping that we will get something accomplished. So I remain optimistic and positive that we're still making progress.
What do you see as the sticking points that remain?
Well, I think more important than the sticking points are where we have common ground. So let me start there and we'll get to the sticking points. From my conversation with Karen Bass and so many other members, we all think that data is important to provide the pathway to positive results in training and resourcing. So when you think about the importance of body cameras, I started this journey 5 years ago because of the Walter Scott shooting in my home city of North Charleston. Watching someone get shot in the back 5 times and then knowing that the police report was falsified to cover it up, had it not been for a bystander, an innocent bystander just walking by and recording it. We want more police officers wearing body cameras. We're funding that at $100 million per year for 5 years in my legislation. The House legislation focused on that as well. So data collection, banning the chokehold on the federal level, something that we have in common. Neither bill does that on the local level because you can't. We don't control local law enforcement. Duty to intervene, training on de-escalation, all the areas of commonality, which allows us to move forward. The sticking points, qualified immunity. This is an area where I've said that I am willing to make it easier for families to sue the cities. This is what those family members I talked to said, that's a really good first start. They were unaware of the fact that negotiations were ongoing and that those of us on my side, and specifically me, had sent out the clear signal that I'm willing to negotiate on qualified immunity as it relates to restitution and recourse for families while creating a moat for the officer. So I am clear on both sides of that issue of qualified immunity. Many people see that as one simple issue. It is not. It's two major issues combined together. I'm going to protect officers because I think that lowering that protection of officers actually forces more good officers out than it does bring bad officers to account. We do that by decertifying bad officers. We do that through the executive order that creates a national database. We do that through, in my legislation, where we require local agencies and departments to hold all records so that they can be transferred, so that we stop this hop from one agency to another agency. We have to get rid of the bad officers, and by punishing cities and municipalities, I think we raise the threshold and change the culture, not of one officer, but of all officers in those departments.
What do you think about the federal forces that are being deployed to cities such as Portland and Chicago? Are they helping or hurting?
Well, I will tell you that first, I'd like to start with the problem and then move to the solution. The problem is that the cities have been unable to figure out how to quell the violence. These chaotic, anarchist-looking cities is not helpful to anyone and frankly, scary to everyone. So getting that right, figuring out that formula is really important. I think federal troops being present, whether it's Portland, Atlanta, Chicago. I know I've seen the response from the mayors saying that they're not going to let President Trump send in troops. I would say as long as they're focused on President Trump and not the citizens within their cities, that the focus is in the wrong area, number one. Number two, I would say that I'm not sure that, when you send troops in, you kind of own the problem. If the mayors want to own the problem without any help, without any assistance, denying it all, I think that's a bad decision on their part, but perhaps their decision to be made.
Speaking of politics, how do you think President Trump's reelection campaign is going?
Right now, I think it could get better. And frankly, I think his acknowledgement that coronavirus will get worse before it gets better was frankly what many of us see. And I'm glad that he sees the same thing. I think the importance of testing is critical. And thankfully, we have funded billions of dollars for testing, for treatments, and frankly, for vaccines. We're going to see more of that in phase 4. I assume there's going to be a phase 4, so we'll see more of that in phase 4. Seeing the president in mask is helpful, not hurtful, but more importantly, seeing everyone in mask is helpful. Frankly, we should take the responsibility as individuals to do the right thing. And good news is, as I drive around, walk around, enter into grocery stores. I'm not doing much shopping other than for food right now. It's good to see.
Speaking of that phase 4 legislation, what would you like to see in that bill, and how high are your hopes for it getting passed in a timely manner?
Molly, that's a great question, ma'am. I don't have a great answer for you. The things I'd like to see in the bill would include more assistance for small businesses. The way I look at it is if I want to help employees, I have to make sure that they have jobs to go to. So the Paycheck Protection Program saved about 50 million jobs. I think having the opportunity to have a second bite at the Paycheck Protection Program apple, so to speak, would be really important. Second one I'd say is that eliminating liability for a global pandemic, common sense to me, and that we should make sure that as long as businesses and colleges, nonprofits are doing the right thing, that they're not held liable for the spread of the virus. Number three, I would say that the importance of being able to provide resources for our schools and our education. I think there's $105 billion being batted around back and forth. I think that's an important engagement from my perspective. More assistance for the healthcare footprint. I have had legislation around nursing homes. If you look at what happened in New York City and around the country, one of the things that is undeniable is that a third or more of our deaths are coming from nursing homes. That is scary, and frankly, in many ways, may not be preventable, but the faster you figure out who has it, the easier it is to mitigate the spread of it, especially when you are confined to limited space. So I think we should start there along with hospitals. But if we don't start with our nursing homes, if we underfund that, I think we are part of the problem and not part of the solution.
What about the extended unemployment benefits that are set to run out next week? Do you think those should be extended?
Well, I don't think we should extend benefits beyond the paycheck. So if you make $100, you should get at the most $100 in benefits. So how we pare that back and make sure that the incentive to go back to work when you can is there. And while you cannot go back to work, we pay you a percentage of your paycheck at no more than 100%. Getting there is really important. My understanding is that states needed 3 months to get there, and we've had more than 3 months since we started this process, and why they're not there yet, I don't know. But I think you'll see some kind of blending of compelling states to get to a place where they can pay people up to 100% of their income and no more is a place where we need to be in order for us to have the right balance or the right equilibrium in this conversation of enhanced benefits.
Given that those benefits that were right up against that deadline, given that school's just about to start, do you think the Senate could have or should have acted sooner on all these things?
Well, I think it's really, the short answer is no, Molly. The longer answer, of course, is more nuanced because there's a whole lot more to go with that no than just no. So think about the fact that on an average basis, annually, we spend about $1 trillion as a federal government on annual appropriations. Of course, we have the mandatory spending that goes beyond that point. In about 16 or 17 days, we basically tripled that number. So if you could triple the number that you have on a 12-month basis, how much time should you take to evaluate its impact? I think you should take as much time as you possibly can to know whether or not you're actually hitting the target so that you can recalibrate if necessary, eliminate if necessary. And then on top of that, we had another $450 billion that went to what they call commercial paper facilities. If you're not on the banking committee, and almost no one is on the banking committee, what does that really mean? What that means basically is that we're going to give the financial institutions more resources to protect more jobs by leveraging those dollars for the mid-sized companies and larger, hopefully protecting millions of additional jobs. That could be another $4 trillion or $3.5 trillion of liquidity and margin in the marketplace. How do you figure out $6.5 trillion in just a few weeks? You don't. So you give yourself as much time as possible before you go back to the drawing board to figure out what you need and if you need it. So the time that we've taken to evaluate the process is really important time.
Why hasn't America been able to bring the virus under control like so many other countries have?
That's a great question. I would say that we are testing like no other country on earth without any question. So we're going to have a lot more cases because we're testing multiple times more people. I think the good news in that testing versus the mortality rate is that the the more we test, the lower that rate becomes, which means that we're doing a better job than perhaps the initial statistics reflected. I would say that the other thing is that we are a very free country. American and freedom are synonyms in some dictionary, typically mine. And so the bottom line is getting a free country to say that we're going to put aside our individual liberties in order to pursue a bigger goal is something that we embrace and something that we appreciate. Getting everyone to march in that direction typically takes a little longer, and that's taken longer. We didn't have that discipline after Memorial Day because of the spikes. I think we, as a free country, took it more seriously after the 4th of July, and the numbers reflect that while the cases are still high, that we didn't see that big spike that we saw after Memorial Day. So I'm hoping that that's good news.
Do you think that there should have been more federal leadership on this issue?
You know, I think the fact of the matter is, if you're in West Virginia, I was just talking to some folks in West Virginia where they have such a low incidence of the virus. What they need in West Virginia and frankly in South Dakota is very different than what we need in Charleston. It's one of the reasons why we've seen local ordinances around wearing masks throughout the low country of South Carolina, because everybody descends upon the beaches during the summertime and after Memorial Day. So I'm glad that we have greater restrictions in my area of the country, where they don't need the same restrictions in South Dakota and frankly in West Virginia, because of the caseloads are so significantly lower. So I do think that fortunately and unfortunately, we are a country with multiple different demographics and challenges, and frankly, some don't have the same challenges at all. So there's going to be a policy that's driven by the local government, rightfully so. The national response, I think, has been good. We can always get better, and frankly, I hope that we are getting better as we recognize the importance that we are not through this yet. And so as we're all putting our shoulders to the grindstone, pushing in the same direction, I think we'll start seeing better results. Frankly, the best result is a vaccine and treatments that work.
The president's also been talking a lot about an issue that's been a flashpoint in your home state for a long time: Confederate flags, Confederate statues. Do you think his emphasis on this issue resonates with voters?
Well, I think it probably resonates with some and not with others, but I would say that what resonates with everyone is that at least when I look at my folks in my state, as an African American who grew up in the Deep South, who understands and have walked by statues and monuments, I will say for the vast majority of most of our lives, we have not paid attention until the last several weeks on every single statue and every name of every street and every name of every dorm in this country. I think we could actually diffuse our focus by focusing on things that don't make for a better future. It's really about reframing the past. That's something that puts us in jeopardy of claiming this day for progress, as opposed to claiming this day to reframe history. So I think what I've been saying for the last several months, and I'm glad that the president has echoed it in one speech, and others have started echoing it as well, as opposed to focusing on what we should tear down, perhaps we should focus on what we should erect, what should we put up. And the concept of monuments being placed in a park where we recognize African-American leadership as a part of American leadership, the 30 people of our history that will be honored in a statutory park, I think, including the Jackie Robinsons, the Rosa Parks, the MLKs, the George Washington Carvers, the Booker T. Washingtons. That's the way that I want to go forward, is to, as opposed to taking down the name of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. I think it was phenomenal when, of course, Chairman Lewis and myself and many others went there for the 50th anniversary. I say Chairman Lewis of the Selma March, not to forget the fact that he's Congressman Lewis all the time. But when we were there and we saw the first African-American president standing under the Pettus Bridge along with former President George Bush, that said a lot about the pain of our past and the hope of our future. I think sometimes those monuments and those names should remind us of how evil the man can be, and at the same time we can see a progress right before our very eyes. So I want to have more statues that remind us of where we're going and the strength it took to get there, like George Washington Carver, like Rosa Parks, like Jackie Robinson. I want to see that entire diversity of American history, as opposed to a simple silo of it.
Last question. These are dark times in a lot of ways. Is there something out there that gives you hope?
Yes, ma'am, Molly. I will say that I'm a hopeful person. I will say that when I was growing up, I was a kid that flunked out of high school. I was a hopeless young man. I thought this country had nothing to offer me. And as a Black kid growing up in South Carolina, there was no hope for me to rise above my lowest expectations. I was blessed with a mother who believed in prayer and a mentor who believed in small business, a white guy. And I will tell you that my life changed because Black folks, my mama, and white folks, John Moniz, worked together to give me a new picture of what America could be. And the lesson that I learned then was that anyone from anywhere at any time can rise above their wildest imagination. I cannot believe that a kid who flunked civics as a freshman in high school and now is a United States Senator. I want America to know that we are a country built on hope, built on freedom, built on opportunity. We have many flaws, but we use those flaws to make us better, to become stronger. It's men like John Lewis, frankly, Molly, that is the reason why he's one of my heroes. He is my hero in many ways, one of my heroes, because while I may have disagreed with him on some philosophy on how we get there, we both had the same goal in mind, not tearing America down, but building it up by making it include all people, Black people specifically. Think about Frederick Douglass and the fights that he had, not to eliminate the Constitution, but to make us live up to our birth certificate, the Declaration of Independence, that all men were created equal. We are a country that actually grows stronger through our challenges. And I hope and I pray that today is another day of growing stronger through the crisis and the challenges that we have before us. And we are making America a more fair country. And that is good news for all Americans. But most importantly, it's good news for kids growing up in neighborhoods like I grew up, where I lost hope for 7 years of my young life.
Senator Scott, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, ma'am, Molly. You have a good day.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I'm so excited to be here with the great Yo-Yo Ma, one of the best known, best loved musicians in the world, an activist for change and bringing people and cultures together, something we could all use more of right now. And thanks for being with us.
Edward, it's so great to see you, you sexy beast. And it's wonderful to be with you again.
Thank you, Yo-Yo. It's just wonderful to have you back with Time. I wanted to start, we caught up, I guess, a couple of months ago, and I think we were all just beginning to get into this routine of being at home, which I know is so much of a change for you. 36 countries in the Bach Project alone, and I'm guessing it's been a while since you were not traveling for this length of time. How's that settling in on you, and how are you doing?
Well, like you, in some ways I feel like I'm taking a sabbatical because it's different from what I've done for 45 years, and so my abnormal lifestyle, which is to be away from home almost 70% of the time, has now, and my yearning to be a normal person, this wish has actually been fulfilled. And the problem is, of course, my wife has to deal with me morning, noon, and night, and that's a question you may need to ask her as to how that feels. But in general, all the tensions that we've always felt being home, I now realize comes from the constant toing and froing, getting ready to leave, getting nervous about doing something different, coming home exhausted and recuperating. And that's just all gone. And so to live what I think is a more normative lifestyle during the most abnormal time ever is really surreal. because I think to be, in that sense, a very privileged person, to have food on the table, to be relatively safe, is while all the fractures in society and in both at the biomedical level, at the economic level, at the racial equity level, it's kind of a trifecta of crises that I think, you know, it makes one do some very, very deep thinking, and this is the time to do it.
When we eventually get back to some version of some new normal, as we rebuild out of the pandemic, as companies and nations spend trillions of dollars to rebuild and reset, have you thought about, you know, what do we take with us? What have we learned in this period that can be brought into that next step?
I feel like we can think about it in three ways. The first, and I'm thinking of it. Let's use a weather metaphor. You know, I feel like we've just been through a blizzard, and during the blizzard, we all had to kind of suddenly get together and find a way to survive. And now the blizzard, the first blush or the first trimester of this pandemic is past us. And now we're facing a very long winter. We're settling down. We're not sure what it is. We don't know what kind of winter it is, but we know it's going to be a long winter. It's going to be longer than we thought. But at the same time, I think thoughts, because we have time to think, is we can actually think about the very long term. And the very long term is the ice age. What kind of ice age is it going to be? How are we going to, do we have a choice in how we want to live? How we want society to be as we go through this ice age? So I've been thinking about all those things from a cellist's point of view. So what is a musician to do? And I think the first question that I asked myself for the immediate part is to say, well, what can I do to help? You know, the Mr. Rogers question. So, like, you know, in a crisis, always look for the helpers. Well, okay, the first helpers, the helpers are the frontline workers, are the delivery people, are they're out there doing things, and how can we help? So, one of the reactions I had was to Zoom into hospital rooms, into patient care rooms, into sort of frontline workers, and just talking sometimes or playing for them, and creating songs of comfort to wherever it might make a little difference.
I wanted to talk a little more about songs of comfort, and also just let people who are watching know where to watch and where to listen. But this is something you began doing in the first days of stay-at-home directives, and I'm interested. I think the first one I saw, which was so moving, was Dvorak going home.
Oh.
I don't know if that was the first one, but it was the first one I saw, and so stirring as we were all going home, and such beautiful music. But how did you decide to launch that? How do you choose what music comforts you, as a guide to all of us who are comforted by music?
Well, Edward, it's actually incredibly simple. We were sitting at our office one day and saying, gee, this sounds pretty serious. What can we do? What can we do to help? And then I had a cello there and said, well, why don't we just record some things and send it out? And I think Jonathan, our colleague, said, well, yeah, songs of comfort. That's great. Let's do that. And we recorded a number of them, and that's how it started. I think the motivation was obviously, you know, what can we do to help? And the content was, what can I play for cello alone? Right?
Right.
You know,
Right.
it's totally very
Right.
practical.
Makes
Like,
sense.
you know, this is, okay, I know this song, I know that song, I know another song. And so that's how we started. And a dozen of those later, you know, we started saying, well, you know, part of what gives comfort is actually people working together and collaborating. And so now, and then George Floyd happened. So it's like, well, maybe we need songs of change. And we're gradually, you know, so I started working with other people. Rafi did one from Baby Beluga, the 40th anniversary. Sandy Boynton did something with Cartoonish for the 14th of July. And Mo Willems, who is a wonderful illustrator, we did something together. Angelique Kidjo, you know, said, hey, do you want to do something? And she dropped in something. And so gradually we put music together, you know, and figured out a way so that it feels like we were in one place and joining forces to express something.
You've always brought music to people in times of hardship and tragedy, and I remember you playing at the first 9/11 memorial.
Oh my gosh.
But you've also, so much of your work has been about music as a means to bring people together, as a force for inclusion, and I'm just, you know, we had Elton John on this program a few weeks ago.
Oh, that's so great.
Who described music as the greatest unifying force in the world. Wonder if you, I don't know, would you go that far and maybe share a little bit about how you're thinking about music in this time of terrible division as well as broader hardship?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things, the simplest way to describe music is that it's energy, because it's a sound moves air molecules. It hits our ears and we react to it. It's that basic. And so sound, or organized sound, is something that is both physical and ephemeral. You can't quite touch it and hold it, and it travels lightly, which is what I think makes it really interesting, because if you like something, it's in your ear, it's in your head, you own it. Ideas are like that. Words can be like that. But words can be also controversial, because words can divide people, right? You say something I don't like and I can take offense. But sound is something that is both physical and somewhat, it's ephemeral, because it travels lightly. And the thing is, and what it does is that it actually stirs both your heart and your mind. So if you want to, and if someone likes something, it's theirs. So if you say culture can actually turn the other into us, well, music can do that.
We talked about music as a unifying force. This is, of course, a time when every industry is looking at its diversity, lack of diversity, history of injustice, and the classical music world is, of course, no exception. How are you thinking about those difficult conversations in the world that you're so much a part of, in terms of righting past wrongs and creating a more equitable musical world?
Well, I feel so incredibly determined to reach out and to actually contact, work with, nurture, mentor, talk to, and first of all, listen. Listen to what people have to say. Listen to, friends who or young people who've been through programs that I know, talking to them, find out what they're thinking, what their lives are like, and then talking to other people just to form networks, relationships, and to do things with them. Emmanuel Axe, my good friend, he's doing the same thing. He's contacting, Juilliard pre-college to say, I want to teach kids that are just young and, kids of color, doesn't matter. I just want to be with them. I want it. And the most important thing is to listen and to start. Inaction is not a possibility. And I think, and from starting and from continuing to listen and learning, and talking to colleagues, okay, I'm trying this. Okay, that didn't work well. I'm trying this. What are you doing? And to just constantly move this. Isn't this the American experiment? Aren't we living the American experiment? This is not, this is not United States is not a lockbox. To use an old Al Gore term, it's not a lockbox. The United States is part of an experiment. We're constantly evolving that experiment in order to get to a more perfect union. And yes, we don't have a perfect union, but that's okay, as long as we keep working toward what is a more perfect union. And let's use everything that we have to help us determine what that union is.
You started the Silk Road Collective more than 2 decades ago, focused in part on inclusion and hope and progress, as you just described. Do you feel, looking back across the couple of decades that you've been involved in that work and related work, that we've made progress in America and in music in particular?
Well, I think there's more and more acknowledgement that all of music is connected, so that genres are not separate from one another. So that, and I think music does break down ethnic identities. We just came out with a recording of essentially contemporary American bluegrass-related music, which is Scottish, Irish ancestry, and definitely deep African influence. So, and here's this great American music that is in fact a fusion and successful fusion of these different influences. Jazz is the same thing. And there's a new documentary called Rumble, which talks about actually in the what we think is sort of rock music with African influence actually has a lot of indigenous influence also, which I didn't know about. But this is all being talked about and accepted more and more. And I think in that sense, because music travels lightly, and because if you like it, you can combine it. We don't have it's the formation of it is that allows for integral unity and is something that succeeds, whereas in society it's a little harder.
Thank you, Yo-Yo. It's always great talking with you and hearing about your work and the impact your music is having all around the world. we're looking forward also to one more performance from you later in the program. So thanks in advance for that. Next, we have two guests joining us. We have the president of the National Education Association, Lily Eskelsen García, and author and educator Chasten Buttigieg. They'll be speaking with Time's Justin Warland about what's ahead for kids, teachers, families, as the nation works to reopen our schools. Justin?
Well, thank you, Edward, and thank you so much to Lily and Chasten for being here. It's so great to have you on. Lily, I want to start with you. The NEA has come out with recommendations with principles for reopening schools. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about what people should be thinking about, what leaders should be thinking about as they plan to potentially reopen their schools.
We have some guidance that is basically right out of the Centers for Disease Control. I am an excellent, really good sixth grade teacher. You would want your kid in my class. I am not an infectious disease medical expert. And so we rely on those folks to tell school boards, educators, parents, governors, presidents of the United States, for instance, that this is what is necessary to do this safely. And basically the number one thing, and it's the thing that people keep forgetting, you should have a consistent at least 2-week decline in the infection rate till you have the community's infection rate under control. It doesn't mean zero, but it means that you see that what you're doing is making a difference. And so all of these folks that go, open up the doors, all the kids back in, you know, rush them, put them all in there. We are more than appalled. We are completely frightened that there are a lot of politicians who don't know what a sixth grade teacher knows about infectious disease control. When you get to that point, and by the way, there are places in the United States, there are small communities, there are counties in the rural countryside that say, yeah, that we can check that box. All right, but you're not finished yet. Now you do the rest of your homework. How are you gonna distance your kids? They have more regulations about how to open a restaurant than how to open a public school safely. And so they say distance, 50% capacity or 60% capacity. In my class, when I had 39 12-year-olds in that class, that was gonna be a challenge, right? But extra space, plastic, what do you call them, plexiglass shields, kids on split shifts, a lot of creative people trying to figure this out, that this would be the bridge to a time when it gets better and better and better. We need the stuff. We need the disinfectants, the hand sanitizers, we need the protective gear, the masks or the face shields. And by the way, and this is not a small thing, you need to have health screenings, if not every day, several times a day. I mean, you're supposed to know who might be at risk of having it and passing it on to the folks that are there. So we are more than alarmed that there's a governor in Florida, a president in the Oval Office, who basically didn't seem to have done his homework. And it's like, open up the schools, all the kids, pack them in there. Kind of a cavalier, don't worry, those kids can't get sick. Yeah, they can. If you have asthma, you can die. And by the way, not a word about the teachers getting sick, the lunch lady getting sick, the school custodian getting sick. And I've had more than one teacher who called me and said, are we being punished? Are we being punished by Betsy DeVos and Donald Trump because we've not been very supportive of them? Are they saying, and yeah, a lot of those teachers will die? And I tell them I don't know what's in someone's mind, but I will tell you the questions are there and I don't have good answers.
Chasten, you worked as a teacher up until your husband's presidential run. I want to ask you about something you tweeted recently. You wrote, "It is painful to see districts and lawmakers sit comfortably with the fact that we are about to send our teachers and students into a house fire with a garden hose." Can you tell us a little bit more about what you meant by that? And also, what do you think should be done?
Yeah, I think I should change my analogy though, because it doesn't feel like we're sending kids into a house fire with a garden hose. It feels like in many places we're sending teachers and students into a house fire with a squirt gun. I mean, in many places, teachers are wondering, terrified, distraught about what they are going to do when we open those doors. Now, I understand that there won't be a perfect right answer to how we deal with going back to school, but there are many, many wrong answers and many ways we can approach this that will be detrimental to the health of teachers and students and families. I follow a lot of teachers. I met with hundreds, if not thousands of teachers out on the campaign trail, and I'm having daily conversations with other teachers who are terrified about going back to school. I'm worried about how, like Lily said, we make sure that teachers are equipped with proper PPE. I think that's the ground floor, is just making sure that teachers and staff have the materials necessary to be able to do their job in a safe way. And if doctors and nurses can't get enough PPE, how are we going to make sure that teachers and staff are getting them? And I also think that to this president and to this Secretary of Education, school is just childcare. It is a way to get the economy back on track, open up the doors so you have a place to put your kids so you can go back to work. And education, school is not just childcare. There are many other things that need to take place in order to have a proper educational environment. But I think this president and the Secretary of Education are simply viewing this as another way to ask teachers to take one for the team. Back in March, we were saying teachers are heroes. Many people, many parents were saying, teachers are heroes, they're so fantastic. I can't imagine ever doing this full time, when they had to homeschool their kids for a few months. And now many of those same people are saying, okay, get back in there, right? Like Lily was alluding to, it's sort of like a trash can was on fire in the school in the spring. And we said, okay, get everybody out, get everyone out of the building. Now the building is on fire and we're saying, well, got to get back in there. We got to do it for the economy. And I want to see the government take very specific steps on how to inform states and local school districts on how they can do this safely. And I think that starts, like I mentioned, with the ground floor, ensuring that every teacher, every staff member, every child has the proper PPE to even go back to school. And we haven't even graced the surface of mentioning what many school districts are doing, which is digital and e-learning, where in many areas there's a lack of Wi-Fi and also a lack of computer literacy. You can't just put a Chromebook in the lap of a third grader and expect them to log on to Google Classrooms and know what they're doing. I mean, in many ways, I hear districts talking about K-2 students getting Chromebooks, and that is supposed to suffice. Driving to a community parking lot, accessing Wi-Fi at an access point, and then expecting that third grader to open up Google Docs and upload their daily work. I mean, we are not checking a lot of boxes here on how to actually think about ways in which we're going to make sure kids are in an appropriate, supportive, educational work environment.
Chasten, you said it beautifully. This administration, the Trump administration, and a teacher are trying to solve two different problems. And it's why what we're saying doesn't make any sense to Betsy DeVos. They are saying, as they talk to business CEOs, who said, wow, I want my people back, and they've got these rugrats in their homes, you know, and they're driving them crazy. Get those kids back out of school. So Donald Trump is focused on, okay, I got to get those kids out of the house, warehouse them somewhere. And so when we say, we're educators, we care about their academic needs, we care about their social emotional needs, and we care about their health and safety. And we don't trade one off for the other. We're looking for a plan that deals with the whole child. And so we're talking about social distancing of hybrid virtual. We're talking about maybe in shifts or every other day. And he's looking at us like, what are you talking about? Get the kids out of the house, put them back in the room. What are you talking about? Hybrid plans, and maybe they aren't going to be in school all day long, because he's not talking about kids. He's not talking about their education, and he doesn't care about the health and safety of anyone.
Well, if I can just follow up, I mean, of course, that you would be the first to say that there is a value to being, in school and learning beyond the concerns about the economy, though I think that's a really interesting and important point. How do you balance that needs when you're thinking about the whole child? How do you say, well, there is this value that, you know, teachers and the American Academy of Pediatrics says we should get kids back to school? How do you balance those things when you're thinking about reopening? And I'll start with you, Lily. You have your finger, you're ready to go.
I am so ready to go. And here's the thing. The Academy of Pediatrics was appalled. They cherry picked out of that.
Yeah.
And they sent, they, meaning the Trump administration, sent things to reporters saying, what a shocking thing. The Academy of Pediatrics says it's more important for those kids to be sitting with my 39 kids shoulder to shoulder. And they went, no, 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 no. Read the whole report. It says you don't do something like that if it puts children at risk. It's when it's right, when it's the right time, when it's the right place, that the social emotional needs of those kids can't be ignored, and that them being out of school is costing something. So do it, but do it safely. And they later signed on to a letter that NEA and our sister organization, the AFT, signed on to, and it was administrators, teachers, and support staff and the Academy of Pediatrics saying, you do not sacrifice a child's life and health for, it was a false choice. And so I just want to make that clear. And I want to make one more thing clear. All of these politicians who say, you know, like, we can't go on like this forever. Oh Lord, I hope not, because I can't. I don't think any of us can. I don't disagree with that at all. And so we have to rush in there and just do it. Just do it. How hard could it be? Just get those kids in there. You know, we'll tinker around the edges as people start to what? Die. And here's what you will be doing if you don't do this right. Think Austin bars. All right, they opened those bars in Texas and Florida and Arizona, and all those young people packed in there. They should have known better, but those were adult choices. They packed in there, and what happened to the infection rate in the community? Went up. So my 6th grade was a germ factory on a good day. Kids blowing their noses and sneezing on you, and you kind of get that. Now they cough on you, and you end up in the ICU. So this is very serious. Just force it in there. Just open it, whatever. You turn it into the super spreader. That will be the new ground zero for the next spike. Then what happens to the economy? Yeah. We're taking steps backwards. You do it right, or you hurt an entire community.
Yeah. Chasten, I want to ask, just from, you know, to refer to personal experience in your new book, I have something to tell you. You write about your experience being a college student, a community college student living in your car, and then of course your journey to being where you are today. But I'm just curious, you know, if you could speak to your experience, you know, as an at-risk student and some of the challenges that you had then, which of course in a time like now would be compounded. How should leaders be thinking about at-risk students like that, and how to help them at a time when, you know, school can be a lifeline in some ways?
Well, it's very kind of you to plug the book, but I by no means went through what many of the students that I train under in Chicago public schools and right here in South Bend public schools are going through. I mean, on the whole, I was extremely privileged when I was trying to access my education. In many places, some of the hardest hit school districts often fall on Black and brown students. And in many of those communities, like we were talking about, there is a severe underfunding and under-resourcing in those school districts. And I'm really worried about what families are going to do when they're looking for a way to make sure that they get back to work so they can provide for their children, provide for their families. And the only way they can do that is put their children at risk by sending them to school. There's already, you know, a flight risk of teachers fleeing the profession. I don't want to see teachers leaving the profession on gurneys. Neither do I want to see children leaving school, spreading those germs at home and creating that environment that Lily was talking about, where it really turns into a hotspot for the community, all because this president and this Secretary of Education said, this is the way we get the economy back on track. For many families here in South Bend, that is just not an option. People need to support their families, they need to feed their families, and they want to get back to work as well. And in many of those places, that falls on extremely disadvantaged communities. One thing that we can also do right now, not only preparing to send our kids back to school safely, is also do what we can to elect Joe Biden president, because I think we also need a Secretary of Education who actually believes in public education. Because when I talk to my friends who are getting ready to go back into school, they're young 30-year-old teachers writing wills because they are terrified that they are going to get sick and they are going to die because they care so much about their kids. They are going to go back to school because they know that's where they belong. They know that's their calling. And I am so scared that I'm going to lose my friends to this virus because we teachers are trying to do the right thing while the government is not.
This is a moment when so much of the way we do business is being rethought, the way that our economy works, all sorts of things. And I'm just curious to you, Lily, is this an opportunity to rethink education? In which ways would you like to see that?
There are always opportunities in a crisis. And this was no fun. Anybody that thinks that all those teachers that ran home and in 24 hours had to figure out what they were doing with 32 kids in front of them now in 32 kitchens and figuring out what a Zoom room was and all of these things, it is not fun. We want our kids back. We want them back safely. But the kinds of things that I've been hearing, it's that they're saying, all right, this whole thing where my district gave me some kind of scripted reading program or scripted this or that I never thought very creative and I never really liked. Now I got to be a little more creative. We did more project-based learning. I started thinking what someone might have in their kitchen, or interviewing a relative that they couldn't meet with. They had to use new muscles to say, I don't have everything I had, and maybe the stuff I had wasn't that good anyway. And so they started thinking, I'm going to have my kids build something, interview somebody, write a report about something that interests them. Not about something because it was on some standardized test in a couple of months. And so they've actually said, in some ways, they're using their creativity in very, very exciting ways. And I hope that doesn't go away. I hope we don't go back to what things were, because things were not equitable and things were still too scripted. And we still didn't have the collaboration that all of a sudden, even on a Zoom call, teachers are getting together, they're learning from each other. They're saying what worked, what didn't work. And it's a little bit different and a little bit better.
It's a great note to end on. Thank you so much for taking the time, to both of you. Very interesting and important discussion.
Thanks for having us.
Hi, welcome back to the TIME100 Talks. I'm Dan Stewart, Time's international editor. I'm joined today by Erna Solberg, the Norwegian Prime Minister. Prime Minister, thank you very much for joining us. COVID-19 has not spared your country, but it has one of the lowest fatality rates in Europe, and you've been able to reopen almost completely. To what do you credit this?
Well, I think we felt unlucky in the beginning. We were, I think, number 4 on the list of countries with people who were infected early in March, but it was a concentrated, large increase we got from ski tourists coming back from winter holiday from Austria and northern Italy. And because of that, I think we managed to put in place our measures so early that we didn't really had the disease moving around in a society. I think we had 5 unaccounted sources, unaccounted persons when we were locking down a lot of activities. And even though there's still people who are sick in Norway, there are still people who get infected every day, but the number is a handful, and I feel we are in control. But I think we were, in a way, lucky in the unlock that we had.
Mm-hmm. Are you confident now the worst is over? Are you fearing, a lot of countries in Europe especially are fearing a resurgence in the autumn, right, as flu season begins again?
Well, we have stepped up the we're taking down measures, but we have stepped up testing. We've stepped up following everyone who is becoming ill. We are tracking very closely. Of course, the borders in Europe have been opening the last weeks. We opened 10 days ago for almost all of Europe, with the exception of some countries. We see that there's an increase of people who are getting the infection by that comes from other countries So more open borders is a challenge. On the other hand, our tourist business will need people. We Norwegians need to move a little bit around, and we are never sure that we are over the worst, but we hope we are. We believe, of course, that we are able to control it, and we know much more about the virus now than we did when we started. So we also know that where are the risk points better than we did in the beginning. So some of the measures we did in the beginning we would not do again, but because we know more about the risks. The biggest challenge we have now, of course, is that when you've had so low numbers, and in large parts of the country, none who has been ill for a long time, people are relaxing. And even though we say 1 meter social distancing, it's difficult to get them to uphold it. And we see that people between 20 and 29 are the biggest numbers of people getting ill now. And they are, of course, partying and being close and summer holidaying together. And it's difficult to keep the discipline up after a period where people really follow the rules and regulations very closely. We never closed down like a lot of European countries did in the same amount, but people really followed our guidelines very closely. But it's difficult. Summer is important when you're young.
I mean, there is definitely an economic incentive to reopen borders in the short term. Do you feel like the borders will close again across Europe towards the end of the year as these sort of cases increase?
Well, we will. We do have a sort of objective measures on which countries that are open. So we have not opened all parts of Sweden yet because they have higher numbers, and it's Europe's longest border. It's between Norway and Sweden, so it's really difficult in a way. People have their summer houses on the other side in Sweden; they can't go to it, so it's still a difficulty. Of course, Portugal, Spain is increasing in numbers now, so we might have to close down, and we are going to follow this. Tourism is important for Norway, but not as important as a lot of other European countries. But we still believe that health is the most important. We did an investment in people's health, and we said it had a priority above the economy in March, April, and we are still following that, even though we try to get the activity going in all parts of the economy. But we will close down if the numbers go too high in countries.
Mm-hmm. Well, that brings me to my next question, which is that this is an economic crisis as well as a health crisis. Has this prompted you to accelerate efforts to reinvent your economy away from oil and gas? I know that's something you already were doing in Norway. Is this going to make that transition more faster?
It's of course because we are losing jobs in different sectors, and we were on a path where we tried to develop new areas for new branches and new areas and new feats, new pillars for our economy, and we have to increase that. So we are doing much more on research development closer to the businesses. We have put up funds for green transmission. And Norway is a big maritime country. We are, I think, in the lead in some areas on not just on electrical cars, but also on the maritime sector when it comes to electrical boats. We have 40% next year. 40% of our ferry systems, of course, over the fjords in Norway will be either on hydrogen or electrical. So we are pushing even more for that, and we see that we have a public agency that we have increased their funding, that are investing or giving support to different technologies and different companies when they are transforming their technology. We are doing much more on education for people who are in the labor market, because what we really know is that every time there's an economic setback, we have more people on disabilities afterwards, because when people lose their jobs, you sort of, the change in, if your competences doesn't follow the changes in the labor market, you tend to stay outside the labor market and end up on disabilities schemes. And so we are trying now to fund different systems of getting people who are in the working age to go either back to school or do part-time studies, to make sure that we keep competences up and that we are developing people's qualifications.
Of course, Norway has an advantage here because it has a $900 billion sovereign wealth fund, sometimes referred to as a rainy day fund. Is now a rainy enough day? Is now the time to dip into it?
This is the rainiest days Norway have had since the 30s. So of course, if you really want to say something, we have had the number of unemployed we had in March, April. Of course, they were temporarily out of work because of measures, but the numbers have not been as high since the 30s. So if you have a rainy day, this is really a rainy day. Norway did have a challenge during the financial crisis, but it really didn't hurt our base economy as much as it was because our banks were solid at that time. So we managed to fund our banks, and then the rest of the economy took a dip down, but went very fast back. We are using more our oil, our sovereign fund these days. But we also are trying to make sure that the things we are doing is directed towards where there is a need for activity, directed towards what will gain us in the long term, but not keep the spending from the public sector that high in the future. So it should be short term, it should be crisis oriented, but it should also be in the long term transformation of our economy. And mostly we manage that. I mean, we have a minority government. We are dealing with different ideas in Parliament, but it's been quite a large support for the economic schemes that we put in place, also with large participation from the Parliament in that work. So we hope that we can bring down our spending after this crisis, but that's going to be a challenge for us in the future.
Mm-hmm. Your long-term ambition, as you said, is to pivot Norway away from carbon-intensive oil and gas industries and towards a greener future. And yet, at the same time, you're expanding oil exploration currently in the Barents Sea, isn't that right? How do you square those two things?
Because we still believe that there will be a demand for oil and gas in the future, and we think that we should explore, but we also know that it's going to be lower prices and the margins will be smaller in the future. But Norway's oil and gas activity we probably have peaked now, the production in Norway, and are sliding downwards. But the question is, how fast will we go down towards that? We will have a lot of natural gas, which still is in the midterm view a good energy source, even in a climate perspective. But of course, our oil production it's a long time since that peaked, and I think we still try to both look at new reservoirs, new areas to develop, new technologies to develop oil and gas, but also to use that know-how we have in a large service sector to oil and gas towards other industries that are more oriented towards cleaner energy forms or totally different businesses. For example, now the knowledge from the service side of oil and gas is deeply working on fish farming and how you can get fish farming more out to a more open sea. So we're trying to put both of these things together. But I think there's always a dilemma for an oil producing country. You can't just cut down on the activity and get people unemployed. You have to transform in a pace where the economy can handle it.
Mm-hmm. Well, but let me take you into the future. I mean, because it's commonly understood that to meet the limits in the Paris Agreement requires leaving some oil in the ground. Do you think that, I mean, in this transformation, in 50 years' time, what does Norway's economy look like to you?
Hopefully, we will have a much more decarbonized economy. First of all, one of the things that we are working on now is to make sure that all of our production systems is not polluting, not emitting climate gases. That means that we are trying to electrify it. We are working with the combination of different systems to make sure that we can electrify the production side in our country. The second thing we do is, of course, that we are seeing other uses, for example, CCS as a possibility, carbon capture and storage. We know since now last 15 years, we have been storing, restoring gas into bases and areas where we are explored the oil from. We are now trying to see if we can do that on the CCS, making sure that the carbon goes back into the ground. But probably believe that could be an economic possibility also. But it costs a bit on the budget if we're going to go through it, because still it's on the explorative part of transmission. But also hydrogen is one of the other areas that, of course, you can use. You can produce blue hydrogen based on natural gas if you have a carbon storage facility.
Mm-hmm. And that's a decision that's in front of you now, the Northern Lights project, I believe.
The Northern Lights project is going to be, we have promised Parliament that we will to the last decide this when we propose the budget for next year. But it depends on a lot of economic support from the government, from the budget, because this is it's not a business model yet, which we earn money on. It's but it's also part of the responsibility we have.
Mm-hmm. If I can segue a little bit, the coronavirus pandemic has also sharpened geopolitical tensions, especially between China and the US and its allies. Norway restored diplomatic ties with China in 2016. And now, how would you characterize Norway's current relationship with China? I believe you're pursuing a free trade deal currently, is that right?
Yes, we are pursuing a free trade deal, an agreement. We've been having good progress in that the last month, but it's not been finalized yet. We were in negotiations before the 2010 Nobel laureate the Nobel Prize was given to a Chinese, and that was when everything froze. We have a working relationship. We find that it's interesting to talk to the Chinese, that they can also talk about the difficult issues like human rights, challenges on climate, but they would like to do it in formal processes. So we do have a process where we are talking with them on issues like that yearly between our junior ministers or senior parts of the bureaucracy that are working together. China is a big part of the world economy. We can't count them out. We can't count out the largest country in the world when it comes to people. If we don't really know how many people living in India, but still China is supposed to be the largest country. And I think it's important to have working relations with them. I think it's important to be able to talk to them on political issues, but they also have to be open for the fact that human rights are universal, that there will be criticism towards it, and when they are not applying the standards that we believe that the UN Charter should let them follow.
Jens Stoltenberg, one of your predecessors, who's now NATO General Secretary, recently accused China, I think, of bullying and coercion were the words that he used. And they said that they pose a threat to open societies and individual freedoms. Is that something you would agree with? Do you think it's important to be speaking out on those things?
Yes, I think it's important to, but I think it's also important to be precise on what you are accusing other countries on, whatever country you're talking about, to say what issue you really are talking about. Of course, we know when my security agencies give their yearly briefs, they always say, we have a challenge, Russia and China on cybersecurity. They are, we can name that they have been, Chinese interests or Russian interests have been into trying to extort information from businesses or from public agencies in Norway, and we are open about that type of criticism that comes out of that, and I think we should state that, because they should understand why we also have some anxiety and limits to things.
Norway was recently elected to the UN Security Council, of course, and you have a history of peacekeeping in the Middle East, in Asia. What conflicts do you expect the UNSC will have to respond to over the 2-year term that Norway will be on there?
I think, well, if you look at the world today, I mean, Syria, Yemen, all of these issues are big, and of course we have an increasing difficult situation in Mali, where the UN, of course, has a peacekeeping operation there. There are all of these known that we know of, especially around the Middle East, which is important. I hope that we will see some type of settlement in Syria that can start, the work on a reconstruction and hopefully a different political situation by time in Syria, because that is a country that has now been in conflict for so long. It's nearly, next year is going to be into its 10th year of conflict, and for all of the Syrians, I mean, there is a need for a new development, I think I don't think you should overestimate what you can do if you are on the Security Council, because Syria is also an example of where the Security Council wasn't able to make decisions in the early phases of this conflict because of the veto powers. But I think you can work on issues like, for example, getting humanitarian aid in, finding principles to try to get people to work. And what Norway really often do is trying also to build grassroots organizations, women, youth into peace processes, so to make sure that it's not just on a high-ranking level that you are building a peace. You have to build a peace on the battleground too. You have to build them with the civilian forces that are going to restructure a country afterwards. And I think that's an important part of what we have learned through the peacekeeping work that we've been done, the mediator work we've been done, is how important it is to bring all the different parts of a society into the equation when you are trying to build sustainable peace.
As you said, the veto system within the UNSC limits the power it has within certain spheres. Is there perhaps the G20 a better forum for sort of pressurizing countries and getting those kinds of results?
I think you need all of them. I think you need to use all of these international bodies to increase pressure. I think it's important to understand that trade is important aspects of economic development, that you have to get the World Trade Organization back on its feet to be able to function, and for this is an area where small European countries have the same interests as African countries have, or smaller Pacific states have, that we are needing the multilateral organizations to function with its international law to make sure that things are dealt with fairly and not just based on power structures.
Well, I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you very much, Prime Minister Erna Solberg, for talking to us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister Solberg, for joining us, for your insights, for your time, and thank you, Dan. Next up, as promised, we have with us again Yo-Yo Ma, who has a special performance for Time 100 Talks. This is the video premiere of Waltz Whitman, featured on the album Not Our First Goat Rodeo. Check it out. I want to thank all of our guests today on Time 100 Talks for a great program and fascinating conversations. We hope you'll follow Time on social media. You can use the hashtag Time100 Talks, and you can subscribe to Time by going to time.com/subscribe. I want to leave you with a clip from John Lewis, Good Trouble. Thanks again for being with us, and see you next week.
Let us not forget that we are involved in a serious social revolution, where is a political party that will make it unnecessary to march on Washington? Where is the political party that will make it unnecessary to march in the streets of Birmingham? Those who have said be patient and wait, we must say that we cannot be patient. If we do not get meaningful legislation out of this Congress, we will march through the South, through the streets of Jackson, through the streets of Danville, through the streets of Cambridge, through the streets of Birmingham. But we will march with the spirit of love and with the spirit of dignity that we have shown here today. We must say, wake up, America, wake up, for we cannot stop, and we will not and cannot be patient.